Matt, overheats are showing up in my shop as the summer carries on more and more. Are you seeing overheats at your shop?
Yeah, I mean, now's the time of year. Granted, you do see them in the winter time too, but we've talked about it in the past, Dave. Overheating your car is the fastest way to a high repair bill that is unnecessary.
Totally unnecessary.
So, so what can we do to avoid the overheating? And I mean, sometimes that's the $3,000 question, right?
It really is. Everyone, they get an overheat, they say, oh, it's the thermostat. I think the thermostat's bad in my car. But how often do you see an overheat from a bad thermostat?
Nah, I mean, not likely. I mean, usually the overheat is the car's been run low because it's had a very small leak. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows the catastrophic leak. They see the puddle under the car or something like that. But it's the slow leak, the one where maybe when you're in for service 5 times ago, they said the radiator was a little bit low and they topped it off. And then you didn't go back to that shop. Maybe you went somewhere else and you had the lube guy and they didn't say anything. And we've slowly been losing coolant on the car. And they start running, they start running hot, whether it's a small leak from the water pump, the weep hole, or maybe a crack in the radiator or a bad radiator cap.
Number one, you would say a leak unattended to.
Is the number one cause of overheat?
Yeah. Probably number one cause. Sure. And then number 2, I would say probably cooling fan not working. That's pretty common to see a cooling fan go bad and not cool the car. And a lot of times you got a couple cooling fans, a couple speeds, and it does okay in May when it's not that hot. But come July, tired on, now it's starting to show up.
Well, and I think too, as it gets hotter and the summer wears on, this is when you start to see the things that are marginal. You go from a very small problem to a quick problem. So maybe there's all that debris and junk covering the grill, and it's Tim and I talked about it last week. We had the guy who he just towed his 4-wheeler or something up north, but he noticed my gauge was just a little bit higher than it normally is, and next week I'm towing my 5th wheel. There was nothing really wrong with that car, so to speak. If you were here last week and were listening, he had a 200,000-mile original radiator. The condenser was partially restricted with bugs and debris, and that's the air conditioning part. All that stuff is stacked in the front of the radiator. So you've got the condenser. Maybe you have an intercooler or a power steering cooler, oil cooler, and all that stuff stacks in there. And the last thing in line, after all the hot air is blown, all those other things, now you have the radiator, and maybe it's just covered with road debris and garbage, and just that can be the minor difference. But going into the shop, a lot of people will do that. Hey, I need how much for a thermostat, Dave?
Yeah.
Well, why? Well, my car's overheating. Well,
right. So the components of a cooling system, we're to kind of break it down and what's there. Kind of the main, radiator is a big deal. That's the heat exchange. That's at the front of the car. That's where the coolant is. Engine coolant is in the radiator. You've got that, and then you've got fans. In the old days, everything had a fan that spun off the front of the motor. The motor's running, But now almost everything is electric. I mean, you still see regular fans with fan clutches, but not as much. That's why you shut your car off. You still hear it running. You're like, what's going on? Well, that electric fan's running.
Yep.
So we've got fans, and then we've got a series of hoses that make all that stuff, Well,
and then you've got the coolant. You got the the airflow part to exchange the heat or get the heat out is the airflow and the radiator. And remember, when you're getting a new radiator, not all radiators are equal. There's stuff made in Taiwan, and then there's other brands, and there's minor differences, fins per inch. I mean, it's
right.
It's very, very delicate stuff. So, but then you've got to have it full of water. And full of water doesn't mean our coolant or some mixture of antifreeze or, if you will. And you can't have any air bubbles in there. And then on top of that, you've got to have a water pump that can actually make that water circulate, because we see overheating problems sometimes from no flow.
Well, we're talking about the fan clutches have gone from fans gone from mechanical to electric. Same thing with the water pumps. You see more and more electric water pumps. Man, we got electric things are just going electric. Electric power steering.
Well, yeah, and their duty cycle. So the computer is running the water pump, but it's not going full blast. It's not like you just turn on the fire hydrant and that water is just flowing. As the heat starts to creep up, maybe it just runs that pump at 40% for a little bit and circulates some water. Starts warming up, it might go to 100%.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the leak thing. So the modern radiator, in the old days, you would repair a radiator. Could be rotted out, and the tanks were brass or whatever they were. Now they're made of plastic. So whenever you've got a radiator that's a little bit low, right there at the top of that radiator, you got steam, and that steam crystallizes the plastic, and that's going to be the $3,000 repair because you're on the freeway. That tank just decides to crack and open up. So,
and we're not getting a $3,000 radiator.
No.
What
Correct.
happens is you look down and if you're lucky enough to have a gauge and you can catch it, you just look down, all of a sudden the gauge is hot, or maybe you start to smell. Be like the toucan, follow your nose. Your nose knows when there's some strange odor going on. Hey,
can't ignore that.
That's a symbol there, and so. But then what happens is you think, I can get off the freeway, or I can make it to the next stop. I'd rather be late for church or skip Sunday or maybe have my ice cream melt than melt my engine, because just going the extra mile or two, maybe, man, it's just not worth it. And that's if you catch it early. Hey, I've had the same thing. I've been driving my car one time, I go to accelerate and it starts rattling. What the hell is that? And I look down, the temperature gauge is pegged in the red, So
so if you're out there and you're thinking, hey, what am I taking care of my cooling system? Gosh, I really haven't seemed to do anything with it. Coolant, we talked a little bit about that. When does that need maintenance and service? Maybe we can help kind of break that down. In the old days, you got your coolant changed on a regular basis. The new modern coolants last a lot longer, but sometimes maybe too long. Seems like.
Well, I think there's a couple things with the cooling system maintenance. Number one, I don't even think you need to take the radiator cap off the car for the first 3 or 4 years, probably, in many cases.
Don't need to.
There's just no reason. I think that was one of the original problems with the deck school with the GM cars in the late 90s. Not a good seal. The oxygen or whatever happened, whatever the chemical reaction was with the air and oxidation, it just didn't like it. But then people start to top off. Then you use hard water out of the hose. I mean, at my shop, we've gone to distilled water. We have a purified water deal just for radiators because we learned over the years putting in just regular tap water out of the hose.
Not a good idea.
It's not good. So leave it sealed. You don't have to check it every time. And then I think the other bad thing is some of it comes from, grandpa or my dad. My dad or somebody at the water cooler said, get that deck school, get that stuff out and put the old green stuff back in. Well, you've got bimetals, you've got aluminums against steel, and you've really got to have it's not just the color of the coolant is what makes the difference. You can have two red coolants and they're two totally different things.
So maybe you don't even look at your gauges on your car, the temperature gauge. I mean, basically, if everything's working well, most of them are run kind of midpoint. It's kind of a safe bet.
I think that's how gauges in general are
they
all
run
designed
midpoint.
to work. It's a quick glance. They're all straight up and
My
down.
gas gauge never does it.
Yeah, I know.
It's always down at the one end.
You know what though? You don't
And the
even
light's on.
You don't even listen to your gas gauge. Your gas gauge screams and you never hear it. And for those that don't know, Dave has been on the side of the road a couple times out of gas on the way to California.
I did. We got a brand new car and it had 3,000 miles on it. We're driving it to San Diego and the gas gauge was bad. I didn't get it fixed right away, and so then we were going to New Mexico, and again we're on the side of the road. Just not a place you want to be. So spare gas can for Dave.
And then so if you didn't run out of gas and you kept driving and overheated the car, what happens? So this thing just gets hot, and everybody will say the generic term is you blew a head gasket. Well, the head gasket blows because the cooling system and those metals get so hot and they start to warp, and that tolerance loosens up, and that pressure, and then boom, you've got the combustion chamber leak. The compression from the engine is now leaking into the cooling system. So now we've got to take the engine apart. If you don't just cook the whole thing, sometimes you don't want to fix the engine because you don't know about the bottom half. We're talking about the top half when it's overheating. But the bottom half is sometimes what you have to worry about. So it depends on the car whether or not we even want to make that repair. We'll repair one car where we would not maybe necessarily feel comfortable making a high mileage repair on another car.
And this is a tip everybody can benefit from. Just get in the habit of looking at your gauges. We jump in the car, we start it, we just start driving. But just get in the habit of looking, move your hands up, look down at the gauges, see what's going on. Familiarize yourself with the gauges. Go, well, what the heck is that little light that looks like a genie in a bottle? That's the oil light. You want to pay attention to that one.
Well, besides that, Dave, and I talked about this several weeks ago, my wife took the car and drove to South Texas, like South Padre Island. That's a long drive from here. You know what I didn't do before she left? I didn't even open the hood on my truck. I did. I take that back. I made sure the windshield washer fluid was full, and I checked the oil. But you can have that confidence if you're at a good regular repair shop and you have a relationship with somebody. You don't always have to wonder. But if you're the guy that jumps around from here to there and the next place and the other,